Welcome to Informative Friday. As people are still entering the meeting, let me begin by welcoming you to today's session, Tips and Tricks in Configuration Console. Michael Smith is our presenter today. Please again be aware that this session is being recorded. And also, if you could please make sure that you are on mute. Please use the chat feature to ask any questions throughout the presentation and we will get them addressed. A copy of the presentation and a link to the recording will be sent to all registrants. If you are not registered and would like a copy, please send an email to myself. I did add my email address to the chat already. And now I'm going to hand this over to Michael.
Hi, everyone. We'll get going here. My name is Michael Smith. I'm a practice director here at Nordic. I'm responsible for all technology for ERP services. And just a quick standard disclaimer, and then we'll jump right into it. So agenda for today, we're going to go through some quick basics. I'm sorry?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, it is. Not having.
Come on, I'm on mute. So we'll start with some quick basics and then go into some data extracts using user templates and then some user web services. And the last two are some questions that came in before this session, specifically around defaulting and updating data on action forms, then how to search LPL, across multiple business classes and some options there. So quickly, some basics around Config Console. This first one I think everybody knows at this point, but just wanted to include it and we won't spend much time on it. But your Control Shift left mouse click will give you, specific field information, and then on your forms and pages will actually let you, create configurations directly from there or launch, into either the UI or the actual business class logic to view it. So you can go to the config console and manually create configurations, go look up in the LPL viewer, or another quick shortcut is often if you're in the application is to, just launch it from there, and it will open in a new tab so you won't lose your place. Again, I think people are aware of these. I just wanted to kind of level set some of the basics that we use all the time for those that are not. And then the next piece is folding in LPL. Whether it's your user business classes or actions or whatever, or the delivered, especially in the delivered LPL, right? It can be 1,000 lines or more of code, and you're trying to find something specific in there. When this was first shown to me a couple of years ago, it was a life changer as far as trying to find examples of stuff. So I'll just walk through it real quickly. From the command menu, you can basically just, once you're in there, fold everything, and then start expanding it out with those little arrows. So for example, if I just want to find a relation, you see there's probably 6,000 lines in here, and scrolling through or searching can take a while. So just kind of a little bit of the UI shortcut. And again, using the arrows to expand out my relations, find the relation I want and look at the definition. Again, won't spend a lot of time on this. These were just some couple basics, but easy navigation of the delivered LPL and finding the things that you're looking for. It's helped me over the years. So we'll get into the more of the meat of it. So user templates and data extracts. So this is doing data extracts with LPL and using user templates to get the data. So a lot of this I'll be walking through. It's going to be a lot of screenshots, but then also, screenshots and snippets of code that we're going to kind of walk through and explain how it all works. So the good thing about user templates is it allows you to define the output and the format of it without hard coding it all in your LPL. So I need to change column order. I need to add columns, remove them because requirements have changed. The old way with, writing it all in LPL or even IPA, right? You're creating the string that's going to be in the, for example, the CSV line for the header, and then all the individual lines that get written out. You're doing all that in code. So anytime something changes, it's got to go back to development. Developers got to change it, update it, retest it. You still have to make updates and retest, but by using user templates, and we'll get into the details of it, the code doesn't have to change. You can just update the templates, and the output that is coming out of the template will change the next time you run the action. So it's not necessarily applicable for every use case where you're doing an extract, but for the ones that it's valid for, it's a huge time saver, and as far as the code goes, and as far as testing and iterations and updates, and even down the road, a requirement changes, you need another field. I don't have to go change my code. I just change the template. So the templates are built using variables and your standard dot notation, business class dot field, business class dot relation dot field, those types of things. So it's, syntax we should be fairly familiar with. The out of the box supported types are XML, JSON, rich text or Word, and PDF. To be honest, I have no idea how the Word or PDF works. So if that's a question, I can answer it now. I don't know. But for the XML and JSON, it's
Excuse me,
smart enough to handle the substitutions of the, so if I have special characters in there that are special characters to XML or to JSON, when it's substituting the values from the variables you put in, it's smart enough to escape those characters for you, right? So it's kind of automagical. Now, CSV is not a supported option technically, but we're going to walk you through a scenario of using user templates for CSV. Now, it doesn't do the CSV escape, but even if you're pulling the data out, for example, if you're using columns and there's comment, if you're using commas and there's a comma in the description, well, that's going to mess up your CSV. You're going to have to find a way to fix it, either fix the data or switch to pipe delimited or, whatever. There's different options there. And again, especially because it doesn't do the escape, this won't be a valid option for every use case. But for the ones that is a valid option for, I think you'll find it gets your extract there much quicker and it's much more flexible. So to get to the user templates, you just search for user template and you'll find the business class here. And you'll see that Infor has a bunch of delivered ones that they use for different integrations, different things throughout the application. A lot are XML. A lot of the XML ones are BOD related, but not all of them. Some JSON ones as well. But this is just the delivered ones, and we're going to kind of get into the ones I created for the examples we're going to look at here. So it just has my initials on everything throughout this presentation, basically. I've created some new ones that we're going to look at here. You'll see that there's 2 that are text CSV and the rest are JSON. And you'll notice when you define a user template, you tie it to a business class, right? So there's 3 of them here that are tied to item and 2 that are tied to item location. And we'll get into how we're using them as we go through the presentation. So here's just an example of the JSON one that's pure JSON. So just how you use the variables in there and the dot notation, right? So I'm using this relation to get additional information. So you would build, this is how you would build the template if it's JSON, and it's just going to come out as JSON. So if you're interfacing with somebody that's looking for a JSON output, either through, a RESTful web service or whatever the case may be, this will handle your, the substitution and all that, the variables, and escaping any special characters and those types of things. Same format with XML. Again, across the board, it's just your, your variables look the same regardless of the type of template. It's just the output that you're looking for. This is really more just an example. We're not going to go spend a lot of time on the delivered JSON and XML ones. I'll show you a snippet of code, but then we're really going to get into how do I use this and actually create a CSV, because for some reason still today, most of our interfaces are still looking for CSVs. So again, so this is how simple it works. We'll get into the relation that we're using here when we do the CSV one in more detail. But for this example, this relation is just returning a bunch of items that match the criteria. And it's as simple as, this. You have a JSON variable that you assign the template to, and then using your for each, it just builds it and does the substitution automagical. And we'll get into it a little more as we go through the CSV example, but it's just a couple lines of code, or even a single line of code, depending on how much you have. If it's a single object, you'd just be for this instance instead of the for each. And you'll see examples of those too as we go through, but just a simple example of how I would do a pure JSON document using the user templates before we get into the CSVs. So our first pass at the CSV, we're going to do two examples here. Is we have two user templates for item. This one's just the header. And again, once I'm done with the code and I'm testing, I want to add lines here, move them around, whatever, I would just update these two templates, right? So the header needs to match the actual data that's going to come out. So if you move things around, you would move them in both, you would add to both. If you have an extract that doesn't need a header, well, then you wouldn't need this for CSV. I like headers because I can see the data and see what it's for, but a lot of interfaces don't want a header. In that case, you just would only have the one. So you'll notice in the one with the actual data coming out, it is still JSON. So it's going to be processed as JSON, but it's going to come out, you'll see later, as CSV. So again, the same variables that we were looking at in the JSON using the same dot notation, for the data that's through relations or directly on the business class. Anything that's related, you can get to. If it's not related and you can build a user relation to it, you can use that user relation to get to the data as well. So looking at how some of this is defined. So I created a user business class that's going to have, my actions and everything in it to build this extract. Just your basic stuff up front. Some of these patterns I just typically drop in theory to help performance. I don't never really validated if that's accurate or not. But I know I don't need auditing or effective dating or anything in my user business class. So then I define a set of persistent fields that I'm going to use. Not really needed for the extract per se, but you'll see later when we look at the UI, this lets me, especially in my testing, I save off, what criteria was used in each of those extract files, as well as the actual file and CSV output itself. So I can see that, what item group, what manufacturer, all those types of things were used. And you can have a lot more parameters and values and criteria than we're going to see in this example. Kept it pretty simple, but the more criteria you have just makes it more specific, right? It's going to be based on your requirements and use case. So all these persistent fields are going to get saved in the user business class, as we'll see later, and really just provide insight. We don't necessarily have to make them persistent. We could use local fields or whatever within the logic, but I like having them saved off so I can see what values were used in that extract and review the data. So the next, I have a couple sets here. They're really just for the list view in the business class so I can sort easily. I was getting annoyed because I couldn't sort by timestamp, so I added these in. They're not really doing anything that's fancy. It's really just for the sorting on the list view. But then the real logic, as far as the selection of the items, in this case, we're looking at items, is all in the relations. Now, if I had a lot of different parameters, I would have a lot of different relations, most likely, right? So, and I have different instance selection based on what's passed in. So this one's pretty simple. It's just checking for the manufacturer. These where clauses can get fairly large if you have complex criteria, a lot of and ors in here. But again, you just kept it simple for this one, but you would likely have much more complex instance selection on the where clause here, and oftentimes multiple relations depending on the parameters coming in. if you want to make it flexible for, multiple types of, I need items to 3 different destinations and they have different requirements. As far as criteria, I can build that based on the parameters coming in and the different relations. Here's your standard actions: create, delete, update, purge. And then what we're going to look into next is our set action that we created here for the find item data CSV, meaning it's a CSV output. And that's what the real logic comes in here. So I have some local fields defined just within this action, our JSON object, new line, different things. And then our parameters, again, if you want a lot of different criteria, you would just have more parameters here. Item group's going to be required. So I made it required down here. And then we're really just filtering on manufacturer in this example use case. So I have a parameter for the manufacturer, and then this item locations checkbox or Boolean is really for the second use case that's related to this that we're going to look at that requires some different syntax. And then just kind of included it all along, and all these have ever done is to send the file storage as an option. Because what we're going to do here is we're going to build the extract, and then as we get farther into the code, we can talk more about it. But now I've got the file. What do I do with it? If we put it in file storage, IPA can then run with it. And there's other options too, but we'll talk more detail on that in a bit. So we're getting into the actual action. So here, just to keep it simple, the instance selection, we're just saying we're true, meaning there's a record there. And in this case, we're doing set rules. There's also an option where you can do empty set rules instead. Rules are probably, this code's going to be the same. It's just how you're wanting to structure this and how you're going to run it. So in this case, we put everything in the exit rule. A lot of this is just general setup for file names and things that we're going to use later. But we are, as we enter here, so we're setting the parameters that we define to our persistent fields so that we can use them in the relations and save them off at the end, so we can see what criteria was used. I commented this out because initially I was using it with just the header here, so it was only written once. But again, like I said, we have a second kind of related use case where we're going to deal with the item locations. So I really just moved the header statement down here. So what this is saying is, if I've entered a manufacturer and I'm not looking for item locations, this is the logic I'm going to use. So this line is just taking that user template I wrote, or I showed earlier, and it's just going to write it out as the first line of the CSV, right? So our CSV output is just that. So one time it's going to go through and write out the header based on what I defined as in the template. And then based on this relation, which uses the manufacturer that we passed in as the parameter to filter the list of items that we're going to process, I'm going to go through a for each loop for each item. And, like when we looked at the JSON earlier, I'm going to still use JSON. I'm going to apply my JSON CSV template, and it's just going through this for each loop. So for each item that I find, it's going to create a record basically. And if you look back, or if we can go back in a minute maybe, and look at the JSON in the template we use, it's just a list of an array of fields, right? So we're just going to select all the
Hey,
fields.
Mike.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. We can't see your screen anymore. I don't think we're seeing someone else's screen. I guess, is anybody else having that issue?
I just got a.
Yes.
Yeah, I can't
Yes,
see the
yes,
screen either.
Yeah, I am.
Yeah, I'm not seeing a screen either.
Someone took over the sharing.
Yeah, it looks like.
Oh,
Take it back.
Give me a second. How long's that been?
Just started.
Okay.
Just a few seconds ago. You're back. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I wouldn't have known. This is the slide I was on. Okay, so now I got the screen back. Thanks, Michelle. Again, so just for each item, we're gonna take that template and basically create our line, and we're selecting that the values from the fields, because it would have used that, you know, all the variables we put in there would have been substituted with the values based on the item that we have. Then we're just going to add a new line and move on to the next. So whether it's 5 items or 5,000 items, that's all, you know, really all the code you need. You know, in the old days, we would be taking the CSV output, whether we're doing it in IPA or LPL, and, you know, adding in just the string data for each one. And we'd have to type in, you know, item.description, item.description2, as well, you know, all of that would be just string code in here, one after the other after the other. It's not hard, but it's a lot of additional code you have to write. And in addition to that, if I need to change it again, I would have to come back here and change what my screen just went crazy. I'm back, sorry. I have to come back in here and change how I'm building the CSV output every time. Now, doing it this way, you know, it's just a few lines of code. I want to change it. I just go back and change that template, upload it, run this action again. I get different output. So after we build all that, we just invoke a create. This is a create on our user business class. We're just creating that record. And again, that's not needed necessarily for the end result, but it allows for easy review of what the criteria were when we ran it, and actually being able to review the data easily, right? Because I'm assigning, and you'll see it in the UI here in a minute. You know, the actual file is the binary data, and then a screen where we can, on the screen, just review the CSV output, and I can tell, you know, there were multiple filters or parameters in here. I would see them all, so I would know what combination was used. So if the data doesn't look right, I can see, you know, what criteria was used at the time, and maybe the criteria is wrong, right? And then, you know, again, optionally to send it to file storage. You know, that's one option. You can also, after you send it to file storage, you know, kick off the IPA itself right here from the LPL. And ideally, the IPA at that point is just picking it up and sending it somewhere, right? Delivering it. And it doesn't have to be just IPA. You can also use ION, right? So you can send it out to ION instead of IPA. I didn't have an example of that in here at this point, but if you want an example, I think the way I got it the first time I was sending it out is in the integration architect, that they have the option to send the IPA or ION. And so you can find sample code in that LPL for the integration architect of how they're doing it. Or if you need an example, reach out. I have some somewhere, or can find it there and package it up. But you know, it's just a common one to use IPA to deliver. But again, ION can be just as good or better in some cases, because IPA is limited to specific ports on SFTP and other restrictions, whereas ION with the enterprise connector could reach on premise, and doesn't have those same restrictions for ports and things going outbound. So, you know, again, the core of what we're doing here today is just building the extract, but you have different options to use to deliver it. So here's what our user business class would look like. This is just our list view. When I talked about the sorting, because I got tired of looking for the timestamps. So that's all our sets are doing here. But you can see each record is going to show us what manufacturer, all that. I can initiate my actions from here. Here's an example of, you know, the find item data CSV action. I have to specify an item group, a manufacturer, optionally send to file storage, and then we'll look at the item locations here in a minute. So here's just an example of the output. So after I ran it, you know, I can go verify. I can scroll through quickly in the CSV output here and see, you know, yeah, my data looks right. If I want to download it, to pull it into Excel or whatever, or just send it to someone to validate, I can just download it right from here. And then just, an Excel example, it's all generated from the templates. Again, I want to move things. I want to add values. It's just updating the templates instead of writing code. So I mentioned the item location kind of related use case. So from items to item locations, it's a one-to-many relationship, right? So I may have, for one item, I may have 10 item locations. But so in this scenario, I'm going to kind of do it a little differently. I'm still going to use that same relation to get the list of items, but now I want item location information. And because of that, I'm going to use a new template here that's on the item location. But, it's really the same header, except I added some additional fields that are available in item location. But then you'll notice the dot notation kind of goes the other way in your JSON fields for the actual data coming out, right? So now that this is tied to item location, my dot notation, goes item, and then items relation dot relation. So it's same concepts, it's just going the other way. It's reaching up, right? Versus drilling down. Then really from the logic, all this below here is the exact same. I just had another if statement in here below the one we looked at initially. So again, it's right, in this case, I've got a manufacturer, but I did check it item locations. So my logic is going to be a little different. I'm going to look at the different header template, which is why I moved it from the higher level. And then again, same thing here, same relation for each item. I'm now going to nest additional for each loops, right? Because I'm going to use I just chose the active, all active item locations. So for each one of those, I'm going to get an item location, and then it's really the same code right down here below where I'm just taking the template. It's a different template because it's my item location template, but it works the same, right? So I'm going to select the fields from it and put it in my CSV line and add my new line character. So I just wanted to show the additional syntax if you were doing that one-to-many relationship of how you would use that nested for loops to get the details of each item location and then be able to write it out. And you'll see here in a minute. Here's the data from this one. Again, it's just similar to the one before, except I have additional data here in the headers and in the actual output. And here's what it looks like in Excel. So I've got everything to the right really came from the item location, but you'll see what I'm talking about here with like item 10,006. I got like 6 lines here. So that comes out 6 times, but it's on a bunch of different locations, right? So when I was first doing just the items, there was only one of these. But by doing that nested for loop, we're getting, all the details from each location for the same item. Okay, so now we're going to jump into some of the user web services and utilizing those in LPL. So this allows you to directly call web services from LPL. You can do whatever you need to based on the use case for the data after the fact, right? Or you may be pushing data or pulling data. But this is kind of the framework for how you even utilize these web services. The first one we'll look at is a very simple one to look up the weather for your zip code. And then we'll show some basic framework examples about how you use OAuth 2 if you're trying to call applications that are defined or API suites that are defined within Ion API. They could be, it could be querying the data lake. It could be IDM. It could be GHR, FSM, or third-party stuff, right? Anything that's defined out in Ion API, because it all uses the same framework and the OAuth setup. So we'll go through a couple of those examples. So the first thing is you got to search for the user web service interface business class. If you haven't built any, it's probably going to be empty. See, the first one we created here was the open weather that we're going to use for our first example. And then we'll look at these other two after that. Excuse me, just coughing a second. So you have to first define it here, and you can write all your LPL here. That's fine. And I usually put the base stuff in here. It's just not as attractive. For some reason, you can't create these in config console, or if they've added it, I haven't noticed. But we'll look at it in the config console view, because once it's created, you can edit them within config console as a normal config in the normal UI, where you get errors highlighted and color coded and all that pretty stuff. So really all you're defining here is the endpoints. I don't know why it still says WSDL, but we're doing the style as REST. So these two are typically always the same. And then you're going to create one or more find actions in here. And the simple one, it's a simple get call to get the weather. So the method is just, this is going to take this endpoint URL and add the method onto it. In this case, we have a variable called zip code and here at the end, and we're going to define an input record of zip code within this web service interface definition. And then it's just going to return the JSON response. And this response HTTP info is really more for error handling and stuff. And you'll see more of that as we get farther along. So now that we have the web service interface created, now we need a business class, a user business class that's actually going to use it. So we'll create our persistent fields, our response, the temperature is what we're going to be getting back, and the zip code is what we're passing in this case. So it's pretty simple. Again, I have additional logic in here just to trap errors, and we're keeping them as persistent fields just so we can save them off. So if it fails, we can go review it. But the core here is the response, the result, and the input. And your standard actions, create, update, purge, and then our instance action to run the get weather. It's basically going to do an invoke on our web service of open weather and call that find action of get weather. And you'll see here the zip code we defined on the web service interface, we're just assigning our zip code to it. This could be a parameter or a lot of different options. I just assigned it as a persistent field that I have in the business class. Then we're going to get our JSON response, and using that JSON response, just using normal JSON notation, we're going to get the temperature and assign it to our value, right? This temp is their value for temperature. It's not like a temp placeholder. But we'll see next, so previously this had run, this is my zip code here in Dallas area. It was 82 degrees. Just run the action. It's going to keep reusing my same zip code here in this example. And now it's 60. This was a morning, so it's 68 degrees, 69 degrees. And just including in here showing, the full JSON that comes back, the temperature and the zip code. This is what gets saved in this example in the business class, right? So we can see our temperature history and stuff and the results that came back. There are also fields in there for the errors and things like that. If there were ever errors, those would be recorded. So that's our simple example. Now, how do I call things? There's no authentication there, not even basic auth. It was just wide open. I didn't even go through Ion API, which in theory, best practice, you really should go through Ion API anytime you're extending outside the boundary of M4 multi-tenant. But that was just an easy use case. So in most cases, I'm going to need to go through Ion API. So what we're doing here first is we're just creating a business class is just going to hold the credentials. In this case, made it just simple. They're all alpha. You can make these encrypted, so the secret keys and stuff are not visible. It's just choosing different types. So really, this is just a holding place for our credentials, so we can reuse those credentials that you get from the authorized apps in Ion API. We can reuse it across multiple different web services and different actions. So then we have to define the web service interface again. And this one's just to get your bearer token, right? So when you're working with Ion API, you first have to make a call to get authorized. And you pass in all those credentials from the business class we just looked at. And we're going to, in this case, just get the bearer token back so that we can use that later in our actual application calls. So again, same style as the first one we looked at. Method in this case, we're including the tenant name here. You can make that a user field somewhere or just pull it from the environment. I just have it hard coded here for ease of demo use. And then we're going to set the content type. You'll notice these weird web service interface and then HTTP header. These are basically, you'll also see it for the authorization later. Weird syntax, but the first part's your name. But it's setting the headers on the HTTP request. So the same thing with the JSON response coming back. So now we'll get into actually accessing those interfaces from Ion API. So didn't include. So I'll update this deck to include, there's a screenshot missing or a slide missing. Maybe it's hidden. I'll check. But there's an action to call and get the token in the first place. Oh, wait, no, it's later. Sorry, I'm confusing myself. So now we're creating another web service interface that's just call GHR and find data. So we're still in the web service interfaces, the two that we're going to define for this Ion API example. So again, your endpoints up here, this is just a get method. We're using employee instead of zip code, right? Same concept that we're assigning there. And then, the additional header that we're adding here is the authorization for the bearer token. A second find action in that same web service interface just showing, structure of doing a put to do an update. And then here's the business class. So that's going to utilize all those different web service interfaces and the Ion API credentials that we just walked through. So again, just some basic persistent fields. The new one here is the token, which we're going to get from our initial call and then use that in subsequent calls. And our employee, that is our variable we're using in this case. All these local fields here are just for the authentication, right? So we stored it in that user business class so we can reuse it. And we're going to use this relation just to get to our credentials and then populate them in here. So pretty straightforward. Again, in this case, we're going to do the invoke to call the web service. And this is, again, we're passing in all this credential information just to get our access token, which is our bearer token, right? So this is, anytime you're doing anything with Ion API, whether you're doing an LPL, IPA, Postman, whatever, your first call is always to get your access token, right? So it's going to return a JSON response, and we're just assigning the token to what it returns. So from there, we can now start to go get data, right? So we have another action here where we're going to call and get, it was fully defined in the web service we created, the full get URL, besides the employee. But, you could define some of that in here as well. I was just keeping it simple. So we're going to set the headers again, and this is our token to tell who we are and that we're authorized. We're going to assign the employee to our employee in the call. And then in this case, we're going to get a huge JSON response back because I didn't put any filters or anything on it. So what comes back is actually a huge JSON with everything on the employee business class and every work assignment for that employee. Now you can filter that and make it smaller. This was just keeping it simple. You don't necessarily need that full payload. You can specify the fields that you want to have returned. And every web service is going to be different as far as, the data and the filters. Just another example where we define the, the put action. So doing the same thing. In this case, we're updating the preferred given name of the employee. Again, hard coded a bunch of stuff here. You can make these variables. I don't know why I hard coded the 45 when I have the employee here, but that's what I did. Okay, so that's using the web services within LPL. I know I'm going quickly because I just trying to get everything covered. But now we'll move on to the question about action forms. And the question was, how do you, defaulting values, and when one value is modified, how do I make it update, other values? So I just did a quick example here. The question was specifically around hires and transfers. So I did this on a transfer. So standard transfer form, I have an effective date, and down way below, I have an event date. So two pieces of the puzzle here. One, what if I just I may want to default the dates, right? So it's today's date. It doesn't mean they can't change them. It just saves them a step. But also if I set the effective date, if I may want the event date to always be the same as the effective date. Again, they could go down and change it, but the way I read the question was, why am I having to go select both of these when 99% of the time they're the same? And why can't I default it so it populates with today? So really pretty simple on the existing action form. What was in here was just single column effective date. I added in the initial value is I use current corporate date. If you have that set on your tenant, you could also just use current system date. If you're all in one time zone, probably doesn't matter, but system date will be based on UTC. So if you're doing it late in the day, it could populate with tomorrow, right? So it's probably best to use the corporate date. And then the question around, if I change effective date, I wanted to update another value. Again, the question wasn't specifically around effective date and event date. I just picked these, but it works the same for any field, right? So when this date's changed, I will then update effective date to be the same as event date to be the same as effective date. I could do multiple fields here, and they don't have to be set to, effective date. I could set it to event date to effective date plus a week, or, whatever logic you want to put in. But it's fairly simple logic to put, on the form itself to, one, default the values, and two, update other fields when one value's changed. And it works with more than dates. It's just what I chose. And this just shows the output, so came in and it was 5-1 at the time. And so it's defaulted to 5-1, the event date set to the same as the effective date, not having to set them both or either. Then the other question that came in, and this is tricky one. I think it's been asked before, but how can I search across multiple business classes? I think specifically it said, instead of looking one at a time, right? You can go to the LPL viewer, search in employees, search in work assignment, search in vendor, whatever. But the example used in the question was, I want to find all forms with a specific field, say candidate identification number or employee identification number, because I want to change what the label is, for example. And I want to know everywhere that I need to change it, right? Instead of just looking manually. There's no clear out of the box way to do this. But I'm going to try to point you down a path of a couple of different options. The first is, so what you see in the LPL viewer is all pulled from this business view business class, right? So all the LPL stored there. Now I personalized this list view just to kind of show you. I added in the base LPL and the base UI LPL, so your forms and pages and all that, and then the business logic. There are fields in this business view. So again, this part of it's just to show you where it's stored. I mean, you could go look at it here, but if you're going to do that, you might as well look in the LPL viewer. It's going to be easier to see. But again, just to illustrate that there is a business class and this is where the data is stored. So here's where your couple of options come in. If you really want to be able to search across all the different business classes, either within, and this is data area specific. So FSM has its own, HCM has its own. One way to do that is through the web services. And again, this initially would be looking at one at a time, but the idea, because they're available in the web services, is you could write a script or any kind of other application development that can access web services, right? Python, Perl, Visual Studio. You could write something to basically pull these down and save them as files on your local, and then you can search through them, right? Once you get it to your desktop, you can search through it easily. So to find it, you're going to need to go through the landmark, the application and system links API view, and add in the framework equals true into the web page. Otherwise, you're not going to see business view. Once you get the API structure that you need, you'll want to call it through Ion API and use, the authorized app credentials. But you just can't see this in the Ion API documentation. So if you look at the business view, business class, you can use this. There's a bunch of different APIs there, but for a quick example I showed was, calling this one, just adding in the base LPL, the UI LPL, and the business view. There's a ton of fields here, right? It's all dependent on what you want, but you don't necessarily need any more data than that. But then you'll see that what comes out is the actual LPL. So if I were to look in the LPL viewer, this would be the LPL for this business class. This would be the UI LPL, and so forth for the next business class. So if I had a script or something, on-prem on your desktop, you could do these web service lookups and save off all the LPL, because then you can, plenty of Windows grep tools to grep through it and find it. So the other idea or concept that I haven't tried, but was thinking of as preparing for this and got this question is, the same way this is available through the APIs and the same way that we're extracting item data. Now you wouldn't use user templates for this. That wouldn't be very useful, but you could build a set action as well that would look through these business views and pull the value for base LPL and use regular expressions to search for matches. In theory, that would work as well. I think pulling them down locally is probably less of a hit. It's a one-time thing and you have them there, or maybe a couple times a year when the major CUs come out. But that I don't know how long that set action would take to actually do regular expression matches through all the different LPL, and you're running it each time. So that's a little more load on the Infor system versus pulling it down to your desktop. So it's not a full solution to the question, I don't think, but hopefully I can point you into some options to be able to get you what you need. And then any questions? I haven't been monitoring the chat, so.
We did have one question come in. If we have time left, can you show us how to set Boolean?
I can't really hear you, Laura.
Oh, is that better?
Yeah, you're better now. Thanks.
Okay. Can you show us how to set a Boolean field, true or false, to default to true?
Yeah, you would just set initial value to true. So where I did the initial value to the, the corporate date, current corporate date, you can do initial value of true or false. Actually, I'm doing it back here. My parameters. Yeah, see here in my parameter rules, these two are Booleans, and in this case, it would be the same if you're doing it on the form where I did the on the action form where I did the current corporate date. Same syntax, right? So initial value is either true or initial value is false. So I'm defaulting them to false here, but I could just as easily change that to true, and that would default them to true.
Lindsay, would you like to come off of mute?
Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Mr. Michael, we did try that. I tried that syntax when you showed it earlier, and for some reason it wouldn't work on my configuration.
Hmm.
Not sure why.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. It should. It's if you want to, my emails in the start of the slide. Laura, could you put it in the chat too
Yes.
for me? And then
if
if you want
you
to drop
send
me a
me-
note, we can get together and look at it together if that's okay.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
That sounds good.
If you send me your an email, or I'll get your email and we'll get you guys connected.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have time for one more question, Mike?
Yeah.
Okay, we're being asked, can you use business field to search on a particular field name? And a continued part of that is maybe it's a 0 to 1 in some cases, yes, no.
I think those are two different questions. Like the 0-1 is probably on the Boolean.
Yeah, this Joseph, I was asking the questions. The first one, business field, I wonder if that business class could be used like you were searching for business view. If you were looking for like the field name of employee across, where is that, all the different business classes? That business field might be another way to look for that type of thing. And then the Boolean things, maybe that's is true or true false in some cases, 0-1 in some cases, yes, no in other cases, depending on how it's set up, maybe.
Maybe. I know it's stored in the database as 0-1, I think, right? So that's a possibility for sure. I've always just done the true or false, and I haven't seen a problem, but I can obviously test with it, and I do think the 0-1 would be another option if that's not working. The business field, I haven't really looked at. I don't know if that would show you everywhere it is on a form, right? But again, I haven't looked into it, but it's something we can look at.
Okay, I think that's about all we have time for. That was a great presentation, Mike. Thank you. If you do
Then,
find, I'm sorry?
did you want to talk to these slides or me?
Yeah, I'll speak to them real quick.
Okay.
If you find that you have further questions down the road, please keep our Coffee with Consultants offering in mind. It allows you 30 minutes with a complimentary time with one of our consultants to get questions answered or solve a pain point. Okay, and our next two, sorry, we still have people coming in. Our next two Informative Fridays are scheduled for Friday, May 10th and Friday, May 31st. So please register or send me an email, and I'd be happy to add you to the group. And that is it. Oh, one last thing. I'm sorry. We do have a team, Doug, Dave, Luke, and Brian, who will be at Infor Connect May 21st through 22nd in St. Paul. Arden Varney will be presenting as well. Please look for them there if you plan to attend, or visit our website and get all of the details.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. And yes, we will send the recording.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank
Thank you.